Hello, ladies and gentlemen of my subscriber base. Today I have yet another video for you about media bias and reporting on video games. I wonder, what news station could this one be from? Haha, what a shock.
There are many questions following Friday's devastating tragedy, namely, why did it happen? Well, Hollywood and the video game industry make billions of dollars glorifying death and mass murder. In fact, the majority of the highest-grossing films of 2012 were rated R for violence.
It's interesting to me how they bring up movies there, but as you might suspect, as an intelligent viewer, that's not going to really be what the topic of this discussion is at all. It's going to be mostly about video games. Now, you probably couldn't see the numbers they flashed up there, but it was top grossing Hollywood movies of the past year. While I do find it amusing that Fox News blames Twilight partially for the downfall of modern society, blaming movies sounds like something out of the 1960s or 70s. Or even earlier for movies, because they had movie theaters before that, and TV since the 60s and 70s.
And one thing we do know about gunman Adam Lanza, he was a big fan for many years of violent video games. Fox News legal analyst Peter Johnson Jr. joins us now. Peter, we don't know if there's a connection, but we do know he was a fan of them.
I absolutely love that little bit at the end there. He basically admits, like, well, we don't actually know that there's a connection here, but we're just going to take the story and run with it anyway.
Well, we do know that, and we do know that the culture of mayhem and mass death is being peddled by Hollywood. And there's a certain amount of hypocrisy that goes into it, because unfortunately, very often these are the same people that say, well, you know, the reason for violence in this country is the ability to meet the needs of the Constitution and allow people to own guns.
Right.
It's more than a little ironic that he brings up hypocrisy. So, they mention a culture of mayhem and death or destruction or something along those lines. Which is funny because that's exactly what gun control advocates will say that guns are in the U.S. Now, don't worry, I'm not going to weigh in on the gun control debate. I keep politics out of my channel. Even though I do care about politics, they don't belong on this channel. But also, he talks about how, people say that guns are the problem. Now, these are the same people who say, on Fox News, these are the people who say that you cannot blame guns because guns are inanimate, you blame the shooter. Well, these same people are saying that you can blame the inanimate video games. So be consistent. Can you blame an inanimate object, or can't you blame it?
But at the same time, we know that when we spend $17 billion a year on video games, we know that there's an Ohio State study that shows that aggression and video game watching go together. They're concomitant, that if you watch them for a long time, you will be more aggressive. We know that it's a problem in this country, and we heard the Lieutenant Colonel talk about this morning, all these NC-17 games where time after time, person after person, building after building are blown up, shot, exploded.
Now, we'll get to the Ohio State study in a minute, but I'll let you know right now I have a lot of problems with it. Sample size, research methodology, etc. But this guy clearly has done no research if he thinks there's an NC-17 rating for video games. There is an M rating, which is also 17 and up, but if you don't know it's called an M rating, you probably also don't know and haven't done any research about the rating descriptors that go on the boxes. So this guy clearly has not done enough research to really talk about this topic.
And the only value is how many people you can kill. So talk about desensitization.
This guy really does not understand video games. He completely does not understand that they have a plot. Like, I don't play Metal Gear Solid 4, or now Metal Gear Solid 5, just announced, to see how many people I can kill. If anything, you play to see how few people you can kill. I play it for the story. Okay? Video games are no longer just about score. And this guy will bring this up again later. And, ironically, he brings up the desensitization argument, which I have addressed previously. Ironically, at the end of the study that he just referenced, the head researcher in his article about the study supposed that video games would not desensitize people. The same study.
We need to be sensitive to our children. We need to be sensitive to reforming laws in this country. Yes, in terms of making sure that there are checks at gun shows. But at the same time, we need to understand that the medium is the message.
Sure.
And the media's message is death and violence.
So this is some classic fear-mongering. He opens up with the old, "Oh, think of the children" argument. Whenever you hear "think of the children," realize that there's a good chance that the person has no argument. And then you just keep fear-mongering, saying, "Oh, the video games, they're all just about violence and death." Now look, would you play any Metal Gear Solid game, any Metal Gear game, and, come on, tell me that it's all about violence and death? Just off the top of my head, the plot to Metal Gear Solid games. You have, what? Human cloning in general, sibling rivalry, loyalty, patriotism, the military-industrial complex, child soldiers. Yeah, that's all just about violence and death. There's no philosophy there at all.
And I was in Newtown, and your great journalist son was in Newtown, and you covered it all weekend, and the devastation and the pain and the tragedy is unbelievable.
It is indeed, Peter.
Inconsolable. And so if we don't look at what Senator Lieberman has talked about in terms of this culture of mass violence and death through media, then we will reap the whirlwind. This will happen again and again and again, as it's happened in this country and around the world.
And there has been the connection with the video games.
So there's not a ton to point out here in terms of logic. But I do want to point out there's a ton of fear-mongering here. Nothing new. But also they use one tactic. I don't know if there's a formal name for it, but I've seen it used a lot to try to justify really poor arguments. They will say things that are common knowledge or commonly agreed to, like, "Oh yeah, there's a lot of violence in this country," or "There have been a lot of school shootings in this country." You know, and they'll get you to start agreeing. I guess it's kind of like foot in the door. They'll get their foot in the door. You know, they'll get you to start agreeing, and then they go and say something crazy. And because you're used to agreeing with them, for a second you go like, "Oh yeah." Now, if you think about it, you stop and say, "Wait, what?" But because you have been agreeing with them in the past, it makes their next statement seem more reasonable.
Yeah.
Ohio State University did a study, and they found this. Where did the director? Can we put this back up? Look at this. You play a violent game for 3 consecutive days that alters your behavior. Each day after, players showed increase of hostility and aggression. People who played non-violent games experienced no change. So it's one thing if, as a 5-year-old, you start playing Sonic the Hedgehog, but then by the time you're 15, you're at one of those crazy
It's a frightening study, but we know it. It's a matter of common sense.
Alright, so first of all, he pulls the, "Oh yeah, it's common sense" card, which a lot of people pull when there's actually a great controversy. But now, let's really get into the problems with the study. Alright, first of all, if you look up the study, which I've done for you, although you could look it up yourself if you want to see that what I'm saying is true, which I encourage you to do, there were 70 people in the study. I'm assuming they were divided into half playing non-violent games and half playing violent games. So the sample size was really only 35 for the group that we are interested in. That is a pretty small sample size. I think this should be done with hundreds of people. But 35? That's really not giving me that, that's giving us a fair amount of margin of error. So how did they do the experiment? Well, there were 2 things. After playing violent video games each day, and the games were alternated in a random order, there were 3 games, the people would be asked first to finish a story, essentially. Or write what they thought would happen in the story. So, like, the example they give is there's a car crash, what's going to happen, you know? And they would say, like, oh, you know, they're going to cuss each other out, they're going to get angry, they're going to hit each other, you know, violent things like that. Now, I don't know how significant a change they saw, because they didn't really explain it in the article that I read, which is from the head researcher, the psychologist in charge. But I don't think that would necessarily translate into actions. And the other part of the study, which seems a lot more damning, was they would be in a fake competition with a person they could not see. Really, there was no one there. And every time they won a competition, they would get to inflict some sort of pain on the other person. Now, this is auditory pain. This is like you play a sound of nails on a chalkboard, or a loud buzzing sound, or a dentist's drill. Unpleasant sounds. Really, there was no one there. And after playing video games, people were willing to do that. But we already know that they would be willing to do this, because another experiment was done a long time ago, which is a really cool experiment, although the ethical side is a little questionable, called the Milgram experiment. I definitely encourage you to look that up. We already know that people are willing to inflict pain on another human being, pretty much to any degree, if an authority figure tells them to. So this isn't really a new finding, and it doesn't really link it to video games. Alright, well, I think this video has gotten long enough. Please rate, comment, share, and subscribe. Y'all know the drill by now. I'll be back to finish this off. There's only about a minute left of footage from the original interview, so I'll be back to finish this off soon. Until then, you'll all just have to wait.